There we go. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'd like to call to order the August 9th, 2023 Design Advisory Board meeting. And we'll start with a call to order and a roll call among people who are in attendance. So Todd Bryan, Dab.
Stephen Eckert with Dab.
Brendan Ash, Dab.
I'm Amanda Cusworth. I'm with City of Boulder staff.
Okay. And Kalani.
Oh, Kalani Pahoa, staff liaison to Dab.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so next, I think the next item on the agenda is public participation, not related to anything we're going to be talking about on the agenda. So is there any more general public participation that we want to include right now?
Kalani, I'm sorry, I'm not sure. Kalani, are we doing that part after Brendan?
We'll do
Or
that.
just or
We'll
just
do it
general?
again.
Yeah, this is
Okay.
anything not related to
Oh.
the item in front of the board, the discussion item. So all outside unrelated things. So I
Okay.
don't know if Lynn has anything
Yeah.
that's not related to the TBAP Boulder Junction 2 plan.
Okay. Okay. So I guess there's no public participation in that category. So moving on to the minute.
I'm sorry. Lynn Siegel does have her hand raised.
Oh, okay.
So I'll promote her so that she can speak.
Lynn, you're muted, Lynn.
I
Yep,
could
you-
for a
there you
moment
go.
waive my time to see. Do you review things like absences of businesses on the mall? Is that the kind of thing that you do? Because I have some
Mhm.
things to say about, I want to direct my comments appropriately.
Yeah. No, not business absences or the vacancies along the Pearl Street Mall.
Yeah.
No, the possibly planning board or the downtown management commission that manages the Pearl Street Mall area. And they have a meeting every month, or city council.
Okay, what does this board?
Design architecture and design related issues.
For like the Hill Hotel?
The Hill Hotel is part of the U8 design committee, so the city doesn't look at that design. They are their own entity for that, so they have a separate design review committee for their.
Okay, so you work on architectural design of businesses, the business community.
And if there's residential, some of the downtown urban design guidelines, the board has purview to look at things in the non-historic area and the interface areas over a certain dollar amount. And then by request from either a referral from planning board or city council on a project that has an area plan or design guidelines associated with it. So those are the projects that this board can see.
Okay. I don't know. I'm sure that I have some opinion on something that you would be involved with, but I don't know specifically what to say right now. So I guess I just have to give up my time. Other than saying that I hope that you try to preserve as much as you can the architectural integrity of the history, although I know that's not part of your purview. I go to the LDRC meetings and I go to Landmarks Board, but the other generalized historical component, maybe of non-contributing buildings anyway, within your purview to keep some of our history alive, I guess is all that I could say. I'm sorry, I can't say more. I'm sure I'm opinionated to have a lot of input, but I'd have to go after I heard something that you were entertaining. So thanks for giving me the time to say that.
Sure.
And thanks for the great question on what the board's purview is.
Gotcha.
Okay, so looks like we have one more DAB member who's joined. So Rory, do you want to give us a little roll call here?
Rory Dapp.
Good. So the next item on the agenda is the minutes from the July meeting, and it sounds like we're not quite ready to approve those minutes.
No, I need those to be, we're going to retract those minutes. Those should be summary minutes instead of transcript minutes. So we will be pulling those back, editing those for the summary recommendation that you guys have. And then that will be what you'll see for the September meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just a clarification on that. So the
Yeah.
applicants who presented at our July meeting, do they have a copy of any of the minutes that we've drafted?
I don't believe that they have a copy quite yet. So
Okay.
those will be sent over. The summary minutes will be sent to them.
The summary. Okay. All right.
Do they have time to work that into their? I'm just worried. I imagine they're on a busy schedule and it seems like a month is kind of a long time for them to wait for that feedback.
I don't know what their schedule is right now, so
Okay,
we will get those to them as soon as we can.
okay.
Yeah, we got the Word document, which is easier to just modify, but Todd, I just wanted to give you some huge kudos on those meeting minutes. They were like,
Yeah,
well done. They were really comprehensive and covered really, I think, the discussion really well.
Well, it looks
So-
like Amanda or Devin got some added, or Kalani got some added detail that didn't appear in the summary. So I think there's
So we won't be doing those style minutes
yeah,
in the future or for this packet because of the the amount of staff time it takes to do those kinds of minutes. The board is not resourced for that kind of staff time. And two, a couple of years ago, in an effort to get a consolidated set of minutes that had action minutes that were good direction for the applicant, that didn't have competing discussion topics for them to make changes to, and that the planning board could see, we moved to a summary set of minutes. So those are the types of minutes that you guys will see moving forward from here, and that the applicant will get. The video transcript is there for folks if they want to listen to the more detailed discussion, if there's nuances to that. So I don't want to get the expectation up for the group that you will be getting these types of minutes moving forward, because that's not the case. It'll be summary minutes, and then that'll help. It just provides better clarification and kind of direction for folks.
okay, great.
And do they how do they know they can look at the video transcript?
It's available on the website. So they talk to their case manager, and the case manager also lets them know that any of
Okay.
the board meetings, they have access to
Sure,
old packets and video transcripts that they can review. Along with planning board can also review those too if they want to look at the video in more detail. Because at the clerk's office, it's listed by board. So you'll have design advisory board, or if they had a visit to the transportation advisory board, all those boards are listed and you're able to access either the Zoom meeting or the audio. So you'll get both, some
Okay.
form of recording.
Yeah, just real quick for everyone's reference, every single board and commission meeting is uploaded the very next day to the city's YouTube website and a whole library within bouldercolorado.gov.
So
Well,
you'll sit,
Kalani, having said that, I think I'm just in dealing with the the Millennium Harvest House student, meeting, which is probably not called that anymore, right? There have been sort of ramifications of I think our summary and meeting minutes being too brief. I feel like it's gotten me kind of stuck in conversations in the presentation to the planning board as well as to the client. So
my understanding was the meeting minutes that the sticking points from the DAB meeting minutes from that time where they were the incorrect version. Not necessarily that the summary was insufficient, but that what was submitted to the applicant and to planning board didn't reflect those changes that were, you had to put in, Brendan, and had
Okay.
adopted. And so moving forward, staff is going to have a keen eye on making sure that the minutes are, one, very accurate that are going in there, and that puts uploaded to that library that Amanda had referenced.
Okay,
So that's my understanding of the sticking point there.
okay. And that the
but-
audio wasn't available either, so I think that was.
The audio, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's, if you don't have the correct audio, you can't look back at that either. So
Okay, okay.
those.
Regardless, I think Todd, your summary was good too, so.
And what, just so I
Todd,
can,
Oh, I'm sorry. I was
Oh.
say, Todd, your summary that's why what you summarize in that portion should be word for word. That's taken into that transcript. Is when you move into that summary for the discussion topic, that's getting put in there. So that's the time to note those special circumstances, or if one person didn't agree, you want to kind of summarize the meat of the discussion there and the big moves, recommendations. And then if you want to note any other kind of special things too. So
and so the process, does Todd do the summary and then I guess what's the flow of work to when it finally gets back to the applicant's hands? And what's
So-
that typical time frame?
timeframe depends on, how much, how long it takes for staff to turn those around. But it goes, Todd will summarize, and then that audio is then taken and transcribed, those summary portions, into a draft set of minutes, and that is given to staff to review for any technical errors that we need to clean out of there. And then from there, it comes to you guys as a draft, so you guys can then look at the process, at the details there, and if there's some tweaks that you think that needs to be made to those minutes to accurately represent what you were saying, then those will get done, and that'll get pulled into the version 2. And then at your meeting, that you should be approving that version 2. Sometimes there are other revisions done during that meeting too that need to be accounted for that don't get adopted right away. So those may get tweaked on if you guys look at those during the meeting time. That's typically how it goes.
Okay,
And then
But-
we have given applicants draft set of minutes with the acknowledgement saying these are draft. They have not been adopted yet by the board. So, there could be changes, but they do move forward in that, the turnaround.
Right,
Sometimes
okay.
they're scheduled for planning boards fairly quickly after your meeting.
Well, I need time to also do the work, I mean, obviously I'm coming at it from the architect's point of view, and I want them to get it
Yeah.
like ASAP so they can budget the time.
Well, I
The,
think what you're.
the
what you're
things will get
forgetting-
actually incorporated, if it's a month or 2 months, it's not gonna happen.
I think
Not
what
time to
you're,
do that.
what you're forgetting to think about is that they're hearing the live discussion. So in
Sure, no,
theory,
they are.
they're
That's
taking
true.
Notes, and they're immediately
Yes.
working on it, and then it's being issued. And then if they think there was some conflict in the meeting minutes, based on what they heard, what's in the video,
Yeah.
that's available the
Right.
next day, that I don't think we're slowing them down as far as being able to get started immediately after the conversation.
Sure, I just, people need to be able to hang their hat on stuff that's official, it's important.
right.
So
Mel,
the,
you've got your hand up there.
I do
Here.
thank you, Todd, for acknowledging, I don't want to interrupt the conversation, but regarding input from DAB to projects. I believe that Brendan, you came to our we had 3 meetings on the Millennia Harvest House project to kind of represent the DAB input because of the scale of the project and all. And I don't know if we have formalized a process, but it would be interesting from a planning board, at least from my role on planning board, and I think the planning board perspective, when a project has come to concept review and it has got referred to DAB, before it comes to site reviews review, I think it would be really beneficial if DAB, as you did that time, Brendan, could come to that meeting when the project comes back after it's been to DAB and kind of give the little viewpoint, especially on projects that have a lot of public input and impact. We get so much information that we're trying to distill and understand that the weight of the DAB kind of falls off. So I think having your presence, because we don't look at, design as particularly as this board does. And it's an incredibly valuable piece of information that I think, and I don't know how we would do that, Kalani or Amanda, if there's a way to kind of formalize that if it comes to concept review and planning board requests to go to DAB, that we offer DAB an opportunity. Now you don't have to, but to come and tell us what you saw and what you, what you recommended, just to make sure that your hard work is represented. Because what I'm hearing right now, there's nuance to, design recommendations and the information. But anyway, I don't know if that would be possible or not, but I think that there could be a lot of value. And I know that I definitely appreciated Brendan coming to that project and I don't know that I've seen DAB come to any of our other meetings.
Oh, that's not true. We've had representatives come. I've been a representative.
Well, I
in the
mean,
past.
since
Yeah,
I've been
when-
there.
Yeah. So it's usually ML by invitation. So
Mhm.
usually planning board would request a DAB member to attend the board. Usually the way that the relationship has been set up is that the planning board representative to DAB covers we'll go over if there's any questions about the DAB review during the planning board. But there are those cases where it's really helpful. And so either planning board will request that or the chair of planning board will request a DAB presence. Typically, it's been our chair, the DAB chair, that goes to represent, but
Mhm.
sometimes that's rotated through on who's available. So
Right.
it just needs to be, it's helpful if there's someone that wants to, be that person for the month or for a project to go and
Mhm.
represent. I believe Rory, you've done that too, right? You've been to DAB? for-
Yeah, and the way that I thought it worked really well is, if you're the liaison that's sitting in the meeting with us, I think at surface level, it's the idea that you're kind of armed with more information than just a meeting packet, right? Because you watch the conversation. And then I would say, based on your judgment of the nature of the conversation, the amount of detail or nuance, that would be helpful if you then say, hey, that was a pretty tricky project, or that you guys had a lot of really critical feedback, et cetera, based on what we just heard. Can one of y'all make yourselves available to give an overview or be available to answer questions? I think when I sat, they asked me to just be available for clarification questions. And I ended up sitting through a 4-hour planning board meeting and they didn't ask me a single question, which is fine.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's what we're here, but that's what we're here for, right? Is to support the process as needed. And so even if there's any inkling that it would be helpful to have somebody involved, I think there's enough of us that are interested that, again, we can kind of rotate the schedule and see who's available. But I think having you kind of initiate, hey, this one seems like it's going to be worthy based on you having sat through the DAB meeting.
Yeah, I think I think the planning board was pretty surprised as to how much depth we do go into the design of these buildings, and
Right.
Hopefully they realize that can be an asset to them. And I started out the conversation on the Harvest House as being, this was a 5-hour DAB review on one project. So it's hard to capture all of that in the summary meeting minutes, let alone a 2-minute
Yeah.
presentation to the planning board. I mean,
Right.
5 hours is a lot to capture, but
Right.
Yeah.
it seemed like there were certain tricky areas that you just needed a little more information on. So that helped narrow it down for me.
I appreciate what I'm hearing, that it falls on me to remember the value of DAB and bring it to my board, which is what a liaison should do. So, thank you for reminding me why I'm here, not just to enjoy the conversation. Thank you very much. I will, it seems to me that if it comes out of the planning board from a concept review and we ask for them to go to DAB, that I need to make sure that I highlight that when I come to the DAB meeting,
Yeah.
you know, to put it out there to see if anybody is interested in coming to present it to, if we feel the need, or we'll have a conversation about it. But I appreciate the process that you're proposing. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, thank you for that discussion. So we'll review the minutes of from our last meeting next month. It looks like we don't have any discussion items regarding applicants. So we can move into board items.
Mhm.
And we have one board item, and that is a presentation and discussion on the Boulder Junction 2 working group and some recommendations from DAB for that group. So we're going to start with, I'm going to kind of turn it over to Brendan, and she's going to do a presentation, and then I think you're going to go through different topics that you want us to think about and respond to, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go ahead and do that.
Hey, Brendan, I was over in that area recently. So they're gonna knock down all of the warehouses that are out there right now, all that kind of 2-story low-rise office park looking stuff.
So, you know, that, Roy, that's kind of a good way to set up my sort of coming into this working group as an architect has been really eye-opening, because in my mind, it's like, oh, well, we see a big change and buildings are torn down and rebuilt, and it's a year or two or whatever it takes for the construction, depending on the size. And we sort of as architects think of the change as happening pretty quickly, but this is just urban planning and city planning is seemingly more glacial.
That's a great word.
Melanie, you might want to correct me if I'm wrong, but it just in my mind, there's the whole, and I've had to ask that several times, kind of like, so we're talking about these changes, and so we'll see that like next month, or and it's this is like a 10-20 year vision.
Got it. Okay, I thought it was strange that they were just gonna level a bunch of perfectly good buildings.
Well, yeah, I mean, and they're owned by businesses currently, and they can't just seize a building. It's more organic, and it has to, like, if somebody moves out of an office building and they want to tear it down, well, now it needs to be a different use or different, you can't build.
Right.
Now
Oh,
it has
got
to
it.
be mixed use as opposed to industrial or office industrial.
That makes
Right.
way more sense. So they're basically just talking about changing the zoning overlay, and then everything's gonna be non-conforming existing until people want to do things.
Right.
Yeah. Kalani, is that accurate?
Well, I think that's part of what you're going to be looking at today. Is really what they're looking at is land uses, and that underneath that are zoning. And the discussion today on land uses, and it may not be non-conforming. It may be that it's those uses plus some of those other uses. So I think that Brendan, as you get into your discussion and overview, maybe some of these questions and finer grain detail will crop up, and you can answer those as they come up. But yeah, no, I wouldn't say it's guaranteed that you're going to have a bunch of non-conforming, Rory. It may be just additional new stuff there too.
Got it.
All right, well, let's jump in then and I'm hoping that this can be a conversation too. I mean, it was a 2-hour mostly presentation with some comments dabbled into it, but the packet they give us is pretty comprehensive, and it's Christopher that is leading this, is like wildly articulate and knowledgeable about all of this stuff. And so this is like going to a conference in Spanish and then trying to kind of translate it for you guys. But there we go. So this was our second meeting. Guys, I don't know how to go to the next page. Sorry.
There you go. See the little arrow towards the bottom says 1 of 47, and then that little, hit that guy.
Yeah, I was trying to give it to you in like a presentation.
Oh, maybe click the arrow. The arrow's not working on your keypad.
Yeah, it is now, kind of.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
expectations for liaisons. So in Rory, we went over the last time. I guess I can go. You know, who's on the board, just because you weren't there. So it's this multi-board working group, just to sum up the last conversation. This is the first time that they've really had this type of discussion. Usually it's the planning board and staff, or planning staff that goes to these other boards, and it takes a lot of time and it's not as cohesive of a conversation. So they're trying this joint board where these are all the representatives, these are all the boards being represented. So parking, TDM, design advisory, environment advisory, housing advisory, human relations committee, open space board of trustees, parks and rec advisory, planning board, and transportation. And it's just really well, I'll go back to that. So in summary, the expectations is for each of those members of this joint board to be able to go out and convey the information back to their boards, and then we can have a conversation and then bring information back to them. And their next meeting is coming up soon, is on August 22nd. So I was gonna try and give them some of our feedback and summary before that, the DAB public hearing, or I'm sorry, planning board public hearing. So in the conversation, I did give the feedback that in the last meeting, our board suggested that maybe we get like a specific question that we can bring up for discussion to form a conversation a little bit better, but they haven't really done that yet. So it's pretty open-ended. So I've come up with several items that I think and slides that I think that we could, help out with and insert ourselves in a little bit. There has been a tremendous effort for Boulder Junction Phase 2 of information gathering community-wide. They're really like covering all their bases in terms of getting opinions from focus groups and like I said, community surveys and outreach, and it seems like they're really going the extra mile to get this to be, sort of a community mind feedback and design.
Brendan, before you get off of that particular topic, can you give us a sense of what kinds of questions they're asking in this outreach? What kind of information are they looking for?
From us?
No, you said that when we're talking about this community feedback.
It all there, it goes into it a little bit in some of these next slides.
Okay, all right.
So stay tuned. So, and like I said, a lot of the conversation that's happening in this group is focused on the Transportation Advisory Board, Planning and Open Space, or Parks and Rec. Because I think that they're operating it, again, like the Design Review Board is pretty specific. And we're usually reviewing very specific projects, and it's more concrete. So, but I do insert my voice in the meetings, just because it's, as an outsider, I do feel like I'm giving some outside perspective. Anyway, so I was thinking that our objectives tonight, just a summary of the things that we could talk about, are the land use designations for creating commercial nodes versus the commercial being spread out, like in phase 1. It seems like it's been a little bit problematic, and less so. So they have several different uses in there. Mixed use transit-oriented development is what they're trying to designate to this new the phase 2. But in phase 1, they have a lot of different uses, mixed use industrial being one of them. But it's created this sense of the commercial nodes being, or the commercial areas being really spread out through the whole phase 1. And then each of those commercial spaces are empty and not being occupied. It's just not as successful, I think, as if they had concentrated. So that's one thing they're going to try and do on phase 2. And then secondly, the proposed urban design character, that was kind of towards the end of the meeting, the end of the presentation. But I thought that was something that we can touch on and speak to, as opposed to the transportation maps. And this sort of was more in our purview. So improving architectural design and variety, architectural and landscape design ideas for successful pedestrian corridors and paseos is a big thing that they're pushing. And then we did have a discussion. There was a image on the slide of a floodway that had been turned into a really kind of vibrant open park and landscaped area. And they hadn't intended to talk about floodplain, but I brought up that, I had been looking at the floodplain map and was concerned about some of the buildings that could even be in some of the zones because they're high hazard or 100-year floodplain, or so that's something we'll talk about later. So now I'm going into their slides. So this is just a summary of our meeting. We had the introductions, project progress and what we've heard, preliminary proposed amendments, and then discussion, and then the next steps. So as you can see, just to recap, Boulder Junction is Valmont Road, south of Pearl Street, to Foothills and 30th, and actually a little bit beyond 30th, to the north here. We talked about what the multi-group working group is. It seems like a pretty informal meeting. It's just a nice conversation, but well organized, and looking for our feedback. Let's see. Expectations for staff. Coordinate meeting dates and agendas, provide materials to review in advance, and send presentations. They have been giving us a ton of information, although I have had to look up a lot of like the Boulder Junction form-based code and making sure I really understand that, and sort of the history of how some of these came to be. But so their presentation material has been great. It's just I've had to supplement it just because I'm not a planner and I just needed some additional help. So here's the project progress. Like I said, they have been asking several, let's see. I think that's later. Okay. This is the potential alternatives for land use. So land use is a big, designating these areas to encourage certain buildings and certain development and certain uses has proved to be really important, I think, especially in this phase 1 area. And this is what I was saying, that they have so many different uses up in the north part. And I think that, you know, I keep asking, like, well, what are lessons learned? What are lessons learned from phase 1? And I don't know if I sense that they kind of want to give it a little bit more time. I mean, I think one overarching comment is about the commercial not being occupied.
The retail.
The retail, yeah, exactly. And then also, you know, we talked about the Boulder Junction or the depot and how it has that big sort of sea of concrete, and it, you know, it was intended to be sort of a really nice plaza, and then it's just not being used, or at least not when I drive through it or by it. It just seems a little deserted.
Yeah, it's not used, and there's the view corridor to it is odd. Like if you didn't know anything about Boulder and you were just driving around and even walking there, you wouldn't know it's even there. And even, you know, because that view corridor to it's kind of a little bit of a curve and it's obscured. And so it's sort of like a plaza, but there's no visual access to the plaza except Goose Creek. And I think that's probably a fantasy that everybody is going to be like, oh, ride their bike and then go have a beer. It hasn't, like, yeah, I've been there a few times and there's like, nobody's here. It's like Friday night. It's totally empty.
Right.
We're the only ones eating there. Like, what's going on? And maybe there just needs to be more people living there.
Right.
But yeah, there's something.
I mean, you know, we
disconnect.
see images of these vibrant plazas with a lot of programming and activity, and you know, and I just think when you're like only looking at overlays and maps and then images, it's hard to even imagine that space being as empty as it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just interesting how it turned out that way. I think there are some ideas about you know, RTD and what that space was intended to be.
Sure. Yeah, because that
Used
didn't really happen.
Right. So
well, and a lot of the residences, like there isn't like a street frontage on the plaza, right? You know, if we think of you know, the European version, your residences or retail would spill into the plaza. It's almost like it's like the back of the apartment buildings.
Right. It's like the
So it's competing with itself.
Yep.
So it's almost like, don't bother, make the streets great and not try, unless you're really going to activate these nodes in some way, but it's tricky.
Right.
When you talk about the plaza, are you talking about that Goose Creek corridor? Is that the plaza?
No, this plaza that's not really on this map. It's shown as kind of green, but you know where the
I bet we could pull up like a Google map or something.
yeah, the depot. Let's see.
Might be easy to.
There's like the restaurant right there in the big roundabout.
Is
right?
that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
But
right.
in fairness to that, right, they haven't finished building that particular edge of it, right?
Right,
There's
it's
a hole in the
true.
ground.
So some of it hasn't.
And then everything behind it, north of Pearl, hasn't come online yet.
Right.
Right. It's this. So there's the depot.
Okay, right.
And it's, I mean, it could be really pretty. It just, I think it's a little confusing when you're driving through here. They've
Yeah,
added some
it's,
greenery. Where are you supposed to be driving? And it's like, I was a ski racer in high school, and I feel like, are we slalom course on the lights? I don't know. I do find.
well, and you can't park there, right? I mean, and in
Right.
a funny way, actually, if you could park there, it would actually activate it more, even
Right.
though you'd have cars there. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, so we have discussed, and I guess if we're gonna, if we're here, you know, just that they have this whole concept has been designed around transportation, the transportation hub of being the RTD buses that essentially left during COVID. And then
The rail. that
then
was
the
supposed
rail.
To never happened.
And so you know, there's still like giant stars on the maps of, you know, where they're intending for the rail station to be. It's everything's sort of centered around this rail station. And I did ask the question, like, what, you know, how realistic is this train coming to Boulder? And Christopher actually said that it's could happen relatively soon, that they're in having good conversations right now with BSNF or
Yeah, Burlington.
so
Yeah.
that they have that the track actually does split, and so that they can have the freight trains, you know, continuing past the station, and then have it was 3 commuter trains in the morning and then 3 commuter trains in the evening that would pull into that station and go from Longmont all the way to Denver. So in the works is my understanding.
It'd be great.
Yeah. So, yeah, let's go. So the requirement for most of these spaces was, and Steel Yards was already pretty well built, but this was this one that was designated as being somewhat industrial. And I think that I get the sense that this is still sort of the most successful space, because it has allowed more flexibility than some of these other, which are more rigid in their designations. But it's just very quiet back here. I think that there's this isn't, if you turn around, you can see this building actually.
Yeah, my friend just moved into Steel Yard. She's like, I've got 3 dentists down the street.
Right.
There you go. That's cool. You can walk to the dentist.
Yeah.
All of them.
Yeah, just all of this has, you know, not all of it, but a significant amount of it has these requirements for retail. So they're talking about having more centralized nodes and so forth. But it is, I was asking Kalani if we could do like a geek out as a board and go do a walking tour, but I guess that's
Well, one of the things over there too, the lots are so huge. I mean, you can see it on even in that map that you had. And so what happens is, you know, it's difficult to pull up. I mean, if you guys ever been to Portland, Oregon, right? It has all these little nodes of like commercial retail and stuff, but they're all tiny. They're like 20 feet wide. And they might be 3 stories, and a lot of it, they lucked out, right? They had this super cool warehouse stuff that happened to be built at just the right time to be reused. But a lot of these are so big. So, you know, you're talking about the developer, the lot owner having to like develop, you know, 6 or 8 properties, right? And make it work somehow in terms of retail. And it'd be really great, God, if you were allowed to subdivide these into much, much smaller lots. And see, you know, because then it could grow a lot more organically. You could have people, you know, who are much smaller developers, you know, doing stuff. But right
And I think-
now, they're just so big, you know, you have to be a big entity with, you know, and so it's, you know, you're fighting that battle of like trying to falsely create, you know, a bunch of diversity or organic growth in one giant lot. And
Right, and
it's gonna be
I think-
tricky. I mean, Steelyard's done a pretty good job of that, you know, they have, but
Yeah, that has come up in a lot of conversations of, you know, some of these lots are enormous, especially in this phase 2 at the end of the Wilderness Place loop. And having opportunity to not only break up this lot, for example, but also create some transportation connections, whether they're roads or bike paths or, so I think that breaking up these lots has some benefit across.
yeah, looking at like the minimum lot size being, you know, a lot smaller than
Right.
what
So
it
this is
probably
the
is.
old map, and this is what we're planning to hoping to amend. So this is office, primarily office industrial. And then this is, so I'm such a, I'm so dependent on these little keys down here. So industrial mixed use 2 and 1, and I can't remember the difference between the two, but industrial mixed use 1 is kind of in keeping what is there already, and then an industrial mixed use 2 is more industrial, and then this is again keeping it pretty much as it is now, which is office industrial. And so we would like to move away from that. And again, we can talk about the transportation connections here.
And have it be a lot more flexible.
And have it be more flexible. So, okay. So in their focus groups, so these are the focus groups you guys were asking about, sort of what they heard. So they had 8 focus group meetings, 2 open houses, 2 online questionnaires, 3 site tours, 3 outreach events, 1 multi-board working group, which is an internal work session, and then a city council study session. And what they're hearing is that they want to maintain and encourage local small businesses, light industrial services, retail, et cetera, because there is some good industrial, you know, in the Boulder Soccer and in that center swath, there are some industrial uses there. And then again, south of Pearl Street, that has become a little high-end industrial, maybe high-end kind of businesses. The pickleball and the gym and the workspace and the pub brewery. So allow for more housing and mixed use opportunities, add more bike and pedestrian connections, make it feel more like Boulder, consider a regional or cultural attraction, create a gateway experience, and then evaluate better, safer connections to adjacent neighborhoods.
What's the, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What's the gateway? Is that like people, if they're coming in from the train from Denver, this would be like the gateway into Boulder, like that way?
Yeah.
Or like
if you're
gateways to the neighborhood from different
kind of
approaches, or both?
both. Yeah, it's kind of coming from north and from the east in the direction of the west, that is kind of a gateway of sorts, although the high, you know, foothills creates a little bit of a boundary barrier, but you know, a gateway experience, for example, at Foothills in Valmont, and then like Pearl Street going under the Foothills Highway. So in that sense, a gateway of arrival into kind of getting like the outskirts of downtown, but mostly just
Right.
way to Boulder Junction itself. In my
And
mind.
then like a cultural regional attraction that would be sort of like a museum or
Yeah, or like-
something.
theater.
Theater.
Yeah, museum, theater,
Mm.
no. So
Culture
these-
attraction. We could do Chinatown. We need a
Right.
Chinatown in Boulder. That'd be great.
This is just the feedback that they got. So the multi-board working group, so in our first meeting, the initial feedback was more flexibility and land use makes sense. Greater densities activities would make the rail more viable. Traffic calming measures along Pearl Street Parkway. There was discussion about putting in a stoplight on Pearl Street, coming out of the there's just that one, there's only really one intersection onto Pearl Street, but it's really busy. It's coming, if I can get back to a map.
Right. Yeah. You know what's so interesting about this is like it's transit oriented development,
This
but
Frontier.
but like the future of transportation is so up in the air. I mean, like in academic circles of planning schools, like people don't even know what's going to happen. Like with driverless cars, we might be having, fleets of vans that are picking people up, maybe in front of the depot is where they drop everybody off. And
Yeah.
so it's like, it's almost interesting to be like, okay, we're planning around all transit, but we don't even know what
Right. Trying
the
to
future of transit is, and then it could change so quickly. It's just, anyways. Yeah, so that flexibility is the key.
Yeah, super important. And I don't know if you've ever tried to turn left onto Pearl Street coming out of Frontier Avenue. It takes forever and people are going really fast. And so
Mhm.
they're talking about this being maybe an option for a stop sign. They want to create more opportunities for pedestrians and cyclists to get both across Pearl Street, under Pearl Street, and then also with this border of the train tracks seems to be problematic.
Yeah, because you come off Foothills from the north going west and you just zip up and the traffic there's no light or anything, so that's all staggered. So yeah, you can never, you're just like waiting, and then someone's coming the other. Yeah.
Right.
It's like obvious you need a traffic light there.
Brendan, is there a model or a prototype of that people are sort of drawn to? Has anybody tried to look at anything that any place in the country or any place in Boulder or Denver or any place like that seems like a viable model that attracts people?
I mean, they haven't mentioned that in our group. I mean, I think that they're really gathering models and ideas from everywhere, and some, just in terms of like the urban planning knowledge that is on the staff and in general, I think that they are pulling from, but they didn't specifically say where. I think it's a lot of lessons learned and Boulder specifically, and Boulder businesses specifically, and then the priorities that we've placed on pedestrian and bike paths and cycling, and also we're not affordable housing, but attainable housing, I think is what we're calling it now.
Mhm.
It's not affordable, but it's almost attainable. So and then also, with the idea that they are hoping for this node of transportation of the train and maybe hopefully our RTD coming back.
That'd be nice.
Yeah.
Todd, have you been down to Lowry recently?
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, there's some parts of Lowry that are similar sort of mass and scale that are working pretty well. I mean, forget about the necessarily the architectural style, but the
Mhm.
sort of mass and scale and some of the retail. Again, much smaller lots, tinier lots. But
And then this has come up a lot too, the question about how to make privately owned space public. How do you, if it's private land, how do you make it into a park? You can't force them to make a park out of it, or a plaza, or and so they're talking about the options of partnerships, and also just maybe carving out some potential nodes that they can work into the plan to be successful as maybe a public-private partnership.
I mean, could it be just like that picture there? We have like those steps. I mean, that scale, like much smaller scale, kind of quasi-public.
Yeah.
I don't know,
I mean,
like encouraging that kind of.
Yeah, and I
thing.
think a lot of, this notion of the paseos and the corridors, I think
Mhm.
where they're going to get, because they do have a little more control over the streetscape. And that's not shared ownership.
Mm.
See, so focus views by the focus group type. Advocacy group emphasize child safety. Areas focused on families and small businesses, housing across Goose Creek corridor, and city support to reduce reliance on cars. Daily users emphasize internal connections, maintaining neighborhood services, and opportunities for jobs for locals. And I thought that was that really resonated with me, because they have been speaking to the racial equality is a huge conversation and a goal, I think, for the city. And in my mind, if you give them the housing, but then you take out these industrial jobs that they could potentially be qualified for working at, and you move them to Longmont or whatever, then that doesn't help. Now they're still, it doesn't help them be able to access the same things that people who don't need to commute can access. Like, if we provide attainable housing, they also need to have opportunities for parks, and big parks and playgrounds, and then also jobs, making sure that they can work and have it be not reliant on cars. So I thought that was interesting from development and design, or daily users.
Yeah, I mean, some types of, I'm just popped into my head thinking about Lowry. There's the international school that's down there. And it's private school. It's probably 15,000 square feet. But it's very walkable. It's like right in the neighborhood. And, if you're going to encourage kids, obviously you could have daycare, right, is one. There's some challenges, but a neighborhood school, unfortunately, BVSD and really Colorado in general is kind of given up on neighborhood schools because they don't pencil out, right? It's much easier to have 700 kids in a graduating class than 100. But, you could definitely, there's tons of private schools in Boulder that would love to get their hands on, like a 15,000 square foot building right in a neighborhood like this.
Right. Well,
you'd have to abandon parking. You'd have to just be like, you don't need to park this building. Just kids are going to walk in.
Yeah.
Did that come up at all? Like parking, like just sort of, why not this be a test case for like what they're doing in Portland and Minnesota and Milwaukee, where there's just no parking requirement. Right. Like, do you want to build a restaurant and don't provide parking? Well, it's not, the risk is on you.
Yeah.
That could be this could be a great place to really push that, and say, hey, this is transit oriented development. We're not gonna we're gonna do one-to-one parking on the residents and, commercial. I don't know, it'd be pretty cool. I mean, it's coming, right? Hopefully.
I mean, it kind of brings us back to this conversation about that Junction Place where does the parking actually create energy in that plaza? Would, people be able to easily access, like today on the 29th Street Mall, I just needed to run in a very quick errand, but there's the parking on that street there's no time limit. So you have employees probably just parking all day long in these parking spots.
Right.
And I feel like people would use that mall more if they thought that they could just park there easily and get in and out quickly. So I'm mixed about the
Yeah.
parking thing. I know that Boulder is kind of going in that direction that we like, and the projects that are being reviewed are asking for big parking reductions.
Yeah, it's true.
Constantly.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure there's a push pull, but I was going to say that currently there is this Acorn,
right.
and it has that
Yeah.
Fresh Start or program associated with it. So First Start, I can't remember. So I mean, creating more of those opportunities, I think you're right, it would be,
Yeah.
or preserving.
But like you can see in that plan, this again, the size of that lot, because of the parking requirements put on that school, there's also some pretty funky outdoor space requirements for preschools. So, I mean, it's like you can't create a walkable, dense, urban, funky, cool experience and have the Acorn School sitting in the middle of a gigantic lot surrounded by,
Right.
parking and
It's lacking the density.
playground. Yeah, we're never going to pull it off unless we really say, hey,
Yeah.
you can build a lot more, or you can, the footprint is the building. The lot is the footprint. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, this was the industrial outskirts of Boulder, and now I think the density has been successful all along.
Yeah.
And I think that we just need to continue that momentum.
Yeah.
Across the way. So development and design, their feedback was emphasize external connections and placemaking elements, questions on how infrastructure improvements will be funded, and mechanisms to support small business. I think, when you start looking at, for example, and I didn't know this before, but if you try and make the requirements for an overpass over the rail tracks is insane, and then you can't make it. It has to be so high, and then you can't make it ADA accessible if you don't have 10 miles of ramp. And then an underpass is really expensive, and I think we keep throwing out underpasses in this meeting, but the transportation member on the board did remind us how insanely expensive these underpasses are, and that we just can't put them everywhere. So
I mean, if you were being like extremely progressive here, have any of you guys been to Japan and seen it and been to any of the train stations in any of the cities or towns in Japan? Because their train stations are completely the sort of commercial hub. So you get off the train, it's inside a building. That's where the grocery store is. That's where the daycare is. Everything is in the train station. And it's almost like a big building. And, it's pretty cool, but it's completely the opposite of what we are used to, right? Like you get out of the train, you walk. But
right, and it's really active, that train station.
Yeah, exactly. We need a train too.
Right.
It's
like we had the bus station, and we had opportunity to bring people to that area, and then the bus left, and then now we've developed all of this stuff around this train station, and we have no train. I think maybe I was sort of feeling a little pessimistic, but Christopher makes it sound like they're moving forward on all of this stuff, and they're in conversations with RTD, and that this could potentially be something that we can see in our lifetime.
That would be great.
Kalani has her hand up.
Oh, yes.
So, because we're trying to get to those questions, Brendan, at one point, because the discussion is varied so far, I just want to make sure that we earmark that those questions that you put out there, those are the things that are going to get summarized in the minute. But, and I know that please let us know when you get to that part as far as summarizing for that, because it'll be hard to kind of track through and figure out what those are unless you're going to earmark it for us.
No, I have it bookmarked, so thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
So other focus groups, responses for property and business owners in that area expressed caution with requiring too much mixed use. And I think that was lessons learned from phase 1, and emphasize adaptive reuse, organic change, architectural variety and innovation, creativity, eclectic vibe of South Goose Creek. And then there was a lot of just keep Boulder weird kind of feedback. So this is the council's feedback. It was to make basically this entire phase 2 this mixed use transit oriented development, and then the Goose Creek Park area. And the consensus is that mixed use transit oriented development is so broad and inclusive that really it just gives a tremendous amount of flexibility for industrial, residential, commercial, cultural, like we were talking about a museum, or any of those things can either remain or be built in here. But then in the next few maps, we'll see sort of where we've landed. So let's see. Council's feedback that yes, agreement on potential changes to transit connection paths and plan. So this was the conversation, Stephen, going back to, you can see that this giant lot here at Wilderness Place are potentially slicing right down the middle of it to create transportation connections. And then also, a lot of this is pedestrian and biking connections. And some of it does help with traffic issues.
Did they talk about like in that zone setbacks or something? Because if you're gonna divide it up like that, which I think is great, you also should have 0 lot lines and really let the buildings be right next to each other, or have very small slots. I mean, you'd have total flexibility, in how you do it. If you have, setbacks all the way around, then you're just back in these kind of.
Well, so that's a good point. So I think that MUTOD does allow for more flexibility in the setbacks, but I also and that is a discussion that we haven't really got into yet, would be the form-based code.
Right.
So this is going to have its own form-based code, just like Boulder Junction 1, and then Broadway, the Broadway Hospital project also has its own form-based code. So I think that hasn't been developed yet, but we will be talking about that. Urban design and outdoor spaces, council feedback, yes. So this was their working session. The place types to describe the character of future outcomes and identify future areas for outdoor gathering spaces. We talked about this in the last meeting where area 1, area 2, and area 3 would have different sort of character. I didn't feel like that was the way to break it up. I mean, it seems logical in the map, but I also am concerned about, you know, if this is all residential, for example, if you have houses that are along the train tracks and along foothills, that doesn't seem like the best use north and south for some of those lots. So while these are broken up in threes very horizontally, I wonder if another layer needs to be added to that conversation. So these are the proposed amendments that are going to be presented to the planning board on August 22nd. So proposed land use, giving them the community feedback of that they want to allow flexibility for housing, mixes of use and taller, larger buildings. Again, kind of that density conversation, maintain light industrial and service uses and more green areas and gathering spaces. And then how it's going to be addressed. MUTOD, the mixed use transit oriented development land use, is the most flexible land use category. The MUI applied to Old Pearl Street, and we'll see the map for that in a second. And then the PKUO identifies desire for enhancements along Goose Creek. So here's this is the proposed amended map. So it's not just MUTOD, but also includes this MUI, which is essentially or just behind steel yards, is what that has been designated. And I think that that's been pretty successful in phase 1. And then the south would be back to the MUTOD. And then these are potential centers or nodes. And again, this big star is the train, and then this would be the RTD as we continue this conversation about transit-oriented development.
Right.
And so when we got the meeting summary from our meetings, the key takeaways that I added to this slide were that some board members expressed support for the MUI land use designation along Old Pearl Street to encourage ongoing access to jobs and community services. That's what I was saying about we're providing attainable housing, but let's also keep jobs in the area. While others were not particular to MUI or MUTOD in the areas, they felt both would achieve successful outcomes. I mean, they both are very flexible and in what can be built in there. Several members remarked that retail is too dispersed in phase 1 and like the idea of concentrating retail around the future nodes of activity. There's a slide in a bit that calls out this as being creating like a main street on Old Pearl Street and extending that and connecting it and making that again, talking about the concentration of commercial and retail spaces.
On that note,
That could be an opportunity for that.
did you guys talk about the edge of like Goose Creek to those other zones? I'm just thinking about like, I don't know, like San Antonio or something where you have like something like that and you could have like restaurants and stuff like on that edge, you know, like a super dense, like cool, something unique, right? Because we've already got Pearl Street. We've got, you know, so what would be cool over here that's unique? Like, wow, what if it was like a really, you know, almost like Rayback, right? But Rayback, you know, almost doesn't interface the bike path right there, but it could, right? It would be super cool if it did. And this would be like an opportunity to do something like that.
Yeah,
I'm just curious what
there has been a lot of conversation around this Goose Creek area. I mean, it is like high hazard floodplain, but
sure.
And in integrating, I think that this is a great opportunity for that public private partnership
Mhm.
idea. And also that this is just land that the city has a little more ownership of and control over. So, I mean, of this entire project, this is what they have the most control over, really, aside from
Right,
it being in the floodplain.
right.
So several members remarked that retail is to disperse. We already said that. So, okay,
And then what kind of retail, getting back to the
right.
lot size and size of things, because we certainly don't need more like yoga pant stores and Patagonia, Cotopaxi. I love all those stores, but
Right.
how many of them do we need in Boulder?
Right.
We don't have any more boutiques. They're all gone, like
I
cute
think that-
clothing shops and all that stuff is gone, and it's like is this a place where it could happen again? I don't know.
I think that the conversation has been more around like maker spaces and
Mm,
creative kind of spaces and art studios and keeping it industrial retail. If that's
right. Okay.
Well, I was confused because when you drive into Nobo now, it says Nobo Art District as if it was going to become like Rhino in Denver or something. But then I get in there and it's
There's no galleries, right?
3 dentist office.
Right, right.
Yeah,
They're trying, I guess, Bamoka's going up there.
yeah,
Um,
exactly. And they're hoping to get a library up there. So I think it's going to happen sooner.
I mean, it really
Yeah.
depends what happens on the west side of Broadway right there,
There,
all that
there are
stuff.
galleries, but you just can't find them. They're tucked back in the
Yeah,
warehouses.
Yeah.
yeah.
So transportation in particular, community feedback was enhanced internal pedestrian and bicycle network. Use connections to break down larger blocks into more urban character, balance visionary ideas with feasibility. So again, that was, let's be realistic about how expensive it is to build underpasses everywhere. People focused on, so how is this addressed? People focused connections are prioritized over vehicular, which is very evident in that plan. And Stephen, that kind of answers that question. That's
Yeah,
bikes and pedestrians over parking spaces and vehicular traffic. Several multi-use paths and sidewalks added, and then revised infeasible or redundant connections. So they have been eliminated or moved.
kind of make it more rational.
Yeah. A lot of these connections in here are pretty obvious. And then again, this is not, I think this is also pedestrian. I can't remember.
And
Yeah.
those buildings are like existing or no? Those are like hypothetical, all the gray, or some are hypothetical and some are
These are existing.
existing. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think, has there been any discussion about, trying, like listening to some of the conversation, it's kind of almost trying to tailor it to a personal desire or whatnot as far as experience.
Right.
But at a certain point, it's market factors, right? So the
Yeah.
fact that there's no boutiques in downtown Boulder is because there's the cost of those tenant spaces is skyrocketed and
Correct.
people
Yeah.
can't sell enough trinkets anymore, to kind of be able to afford those spaces. But then the same thing here, if the goal would be to ultimately encourage redevelopment so that it starts to take shape in life and I guess being careful not to be like, this block can only build this particular type of retail with this
Right.
particular type of housing. And it's like, you got to find a very special person who wants to, check off that particular site, as opposed to this more organic component that I see showing up in a couple places in the notes, Brendan, as far as, again, like the vibrant cities of history have evolved just on kind of market demand and necessity and have changed shape and form over time. And you've got, you know, a lot of cafes occupying old banks or something, you know, like,
Sure.
And I
But
think
there's still kind of a pattern, you know, of, again, in terms of like lot size and things like that. You know, I only bring up Portland because I just was there a week ago, and, you know, they do have boutiques because it would be like, let's say we took one street in Newlands right now and said, we're going to allow retail all along this street, and all the houses become retail, right? And Patagonia is not going to go in there. And so you sort of have, if you want that kind of stuff, you do have to kind of create the conditions for something like that to happen. So it's tricky, you know, because the market here, what would the market say, I guess, reacting to this? I don't know what it would be. Maybe it would be like, well,
Well, I think
housing,
that's
housing.
always, to me,
regardless
that's,
of what like the market wants, I think, you know, they're seeing that Patagonia or boutiques, nobody is going into the phase one. I mean, not, I can't say nobody, but there's a lot of empty spaces in that phase one.
Right.
But I also think that the idea is, from the community feedback, is that they don't want this to be the 29th Street Mall. Like, they want
Right.
this to be industrial and arts, artsy and funky, and you know, car mechanics, and next to, you know, art
Mhm.
galleries and a brewery, and to keep it just organic and funky. So I think that there's, rather than encouraging this high level of retail that we see all over Boulder, I think that they're really trying to preserve the character that is currently in there as best
Right.
they can, without having it turn into a 29th Street Mall and
Right.
pushing out all these kind of cool industrial funky spaces that are there now.
Right.
well, it's interesting. It's gonna be interesting to watch because, you know, a lot of phase one is the desolation is just poor timing relative to COVID, and some of their anchor tenants like Splunk and things, like, they didn't, you know, they were gonna have hundreds of bodies roaming around out there looking for lunch, looking for a spot to
Right.
take a meeting. And I think that's starting to come back now. And then in combination with that 30th and Pearl, do we know how many units are about to come online in the next 6 months when those are
Oh,
all
man.
CO'd?
There's
But
a
like,
lot.
Curtis Park Deli just opened on, came up from Denver and opened a storefront on 30th there in Pearl, just south of Pearl, East 30th. And if, you know, if there's 300 units coming online soon, hopefully we'll
Right.
start to see, you know, that there's just that much more energy and bodies looking for stuff to do in this area.
Mhm.
Right. I guess the question is, it like a destination versus, you know, stuff, services for the people that are living there, you know.
Yeah, that's part of it too.
Yeah.
So this, as again, the last meeting was highly focused on transportation, so we did get a lot of meeting takeaways from it. A lot of conversation came up about this particular connection, which, you know, if you look at this map, to me, it feels like somewhat of an island. I mean, they're really cut off by the
Mhm.
tracks and foothills. And then, so knowing that we can't do underpasses everywhere, there really is just Goose Creek is essentially, and Pearl are our biggest connections right here. And then they would have a connection to the train station, obviously. And then there was conversation from the TAB member that said that, you know, we need to start thinking about reducing these number of underpasses and overpasses. But, you know, this is a connection here that they've put a lot of money into this connection that sort of dumps you at Google,
Mhm.
and it dies at the railway. So I think that this is maybe one of the most important connections here, because they've already put in so much bike path and infrastructure but essentially it's Pearl and Goose Creek that are the only real connections across the train tracks. It's just such a barrier.
Until the station gets built, right? Because obviously just the nature of the station, you have to be able to get on both sides of the tracks.
Right. And the
Right.
station is built, basically. It's just that there's no trains going to it.
Oh,
Where is the actual state? It's the red
It
star.
is right there, yeah.
because
Yeah.
I saw some old renderings, I remember, and they had overpasses for pedestrians and a bunch of links across the tracks for when they actually start operating.
And that's what I was saying, those overpasses have to be like
Yeah,
30 feet in the air or something insane.
yeah.
And then it's, because you've seen that in Rhino, where they have elevators and
Yep.
stairs and then the overpass and coming down, but it's a barrier for sure.
And then huge parking lots, always, because
Right.
when you get off the train, where are you going?
Right.
Right.
Well, that's what, hopefully then we'll have the driverless vans will pick you up and drive you right to your point A to point B.
Right. So there's that stoplight that I mentioned,
Added that one.
and then a big connector between Wilderness Place and Old Pearl Street. I think that's an important connection. Over,
That stoplight, that's Sanitas Brewery, if you go south there.
yeah,
Okay.
right here. And so this is BC Interiors and Boulder Pickleball and
Oh, right.
La
La Sportiva.
Sportiva, thank you.
Brandon, can you go back to that map one more time?
Mhm.
Is the bike path part of Goose Creek, and doesn't that connect to the entire bicycle path network, both
Mhm.
west of there and east of there?
Yeah,
I mean,
this
that's
is
the principal
biggest-
connection, right?
Yes, that's the
Mhm.
biggest connector.
Right.
Really, kind of the only pedestrian connector currently. Or,
Right. Besides sidewalks.
well,
Right,
yeah,
But
I
in
mean,
terms of
under
bicycling,
foothills or, yeah,
it's access. It seems like a huge connector.
it's a huge connector and
Mhm.
maybe one of the only.
Yeah.
currently. Um,
That's
and
why I
it-
think that edge is so critical.
Yeah.
On Goose Creek.
Yeah, what you do with that.
Goose Creek is an amenity, just like you said, create
Yeah.
outdoor gathering spaces, improve retail viability, keep Boulder funky. So this is getting into the design, proposed design character. And that I think that we could have some conversations about. The proposed amendments in the urban design, talking about specifically about this, Frontier Avenue, Sanitas Brewery, et cetera.
Mm.
Again, there's another potential division of property.
Right.
Sort of reallocating spaces in here. And then these pedestrian corridors and paseos and, what makes this successful. And Stephen, a lot of what you've been saying about the zero lot line opportunities
Sure.
and pedestrian opportunities, but this just like this image feels cozy. And then this image feels like the Boulder, the plaza in front of the restaurant, but
Right.
has people on it. I think that there's opportunity, like maybe it is that we just need more occupants in the housing.
Yeah, maybe it's occupant. I mean, I guess it sounds like they really want kind of Rhino, like that's what it sounds like, right? I mean, like art studios, galleries, funky I mean,
Breweries.
brewery, which would be great. But I wonder if like the cultural piece, I mean, what would be the anchor here, right? I mean, I think they wanted the depot to be the anchor and it just hasn't. It isn't. And I don't know that it ever could be because it's really just a restaurant, right? It's never going to be more than that. Now, maybe if it was like a open mic music venue or something, that was improv or like some, I don't know. I mean,
It
or
feels
even
like there's-
programming.
it feels like there's gonna be a lot of observational opportunities in phase one still, because wasn't that whole concept in phase one like a Wunderorf? And there was supposed to be
Right.
this like no cars, beer garden spills out into the street. And you do have Splunk right there, like we said, Rocky Mountain Institute. I'm under the impression Google is now requiring all employees to come back to the office. So I think we've only seen a fraction of the bodies that come in and out of the Google campus, Caddy Corner. It'll be interesting to observe if phase one actually performs as intended in the next, year and a half, 2 years when all
Right.
this stuff's coming online.
Right, and how
Mhm.
that. I don't know, I just still think it would be cool to have some kind of anchor in there, like, I'm thinking like, God, imagine if you had like the Exploratorium, like in San Francisco, the children's museum that's like spectacular, something like that, like in this neighborhood that like really people wanted to go to, and ride their bike there, and
And-
I just don't know,
There's that junkyard social currently in there, and that draws a fair number, but it is again, it's private.
right,
So how do you get more public participation in these privately owned spaces? But I agree, I think, making more public engaged spaces like museums and theaters and art schools or
yeah, some,
so like Pottery Lab kind of spaces.
Yeah, well, that's a bummer because that just moved way north.
I know, yeah,
So let me ask this, like seeing that they're taking, to me, like when you were talking about like Rhino and then the mechanics next to the brewery kind of thing, and then maker spaces, I mean, you're quite literally describing the Sanitas building
Right.
and even its character, like some
Mhm.
long industrial Quonset type building that can
Mhm.
build affordably so that it can support, tenants of that quality. But then seeing that they want to cut that in half.
Or maybe it's just a passage through the middle, like a little tunnel you walk through.
Another overpass.
They should have more Airstream trailers like they have in the one space. I love that.
I think that they
Yeah.
are going to have to work with the conflicting desire of the community to keep this as it's, some of these spaces are car mechanic shops and they're like car junkyards, and how to
Mhm.
keep that character and those jobs, with this next door to it. And also, I don't know. I think it's conflicting for sure.
Well, it's interesting because right across Foothills is just more of that arguably has more of the organic piece in it. Cause you got like Vision Quest Brewery tucked in there. You've got that Divine Spirits or whatever, and they kind of throw parties and stuff.
And
And they're literally just right next, they're like in a Quonset building next to the auto body shop.
right. And
But
the
it
one,
almost-
what's the place that has like I've done improv in there. That's like, there's like a little theater on the end of one of those. I'm forgetting the name of it, but
that
yeah,
one is Vision Quest. Yeah. They got the
Yeah.
little stage at the back there and you
Yeah.
sell all the brewery equipment.
yeah,
And so, and then there's that cafe that everybody likes on the bike path right
Mhm.
there. So in a lot of ways that has, is Foothills a natural barrier to say, hey, let that sort of activity happen east of Foothills, and this needs to be more integrated into kind of 30th and Pearl kind of vernacular that's starting to arrive? Or is it nice to kind of bring some of that activity across Foothills to kind of link it?
yeah,
Yeah, I like that. Because that is mixed and it's funky and it's the east of Foothills.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think another conversation that we keep talking about is creating these nodes, and we'll look at that in a second, but Are these the right opportunities for these kind of sidewalk moments and paseos? I get concerned about this along the tracks, which is turning into a bit of a Boulder Creek bypass situation where there's some camping happening back here, and
I mean, if there's public, private, I mean, maybe is this stuff need to be so defined? Could it be like encouraged, like say, hey, if you want to, build this through the middle of your building, some kind of thing, we're going to co-build it with you. The city's going to like cough up dollars and be like, yeah, well, you want to pay for half of it, we'll pay for half of it, and we'll encourage you to do it, but where it ends up, it's a little bit like, you walk around CU's campus and there's like a, cutoff on, across a green or something, because that was like actually where it needed to be, rather than like, oh, okay, here's where it's all defined.
right, because people are naturally going on that path.
Right. But like encourage the owners of these buildings to do something with, but then you got to back it up with money. Right. I mean,
Rhino's a funny example because it was all this mechanic shop crap that then just happened to be the cheapest real estate near town for artists to have big, spaces that they could paint all over and not worry. And then some cool restaurants and boutique retail started coming in. They were doing the flea markets down there and stuff. Fast forward 10 years, what you have is 30th and Pearl mixed use buildings that are nondescript and Patagonia.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
There on 26 and
right.
Walnut.
Yeah, exactly. They've
Really
come in.
gentrified. Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's what happens. They, gets gentrified, so to speak.
But what's interesting, it's almost because that's exactly right. It was existing building infrastructure that became gentrified, and then redevelopment happened around it, in it, and now north of it, because it's becoming this hot link. Whereas what I think I'm hearing is, this is all kind of under the premise that it would be new building stock.
Yeah,
that somehow embodies the kind of grit and authenticity of what happens mid gentrification of existing buildings.
Right, exactly. How do you yeah, exactly. Like the taxi building, all that stuff is like super great, 1920s, 30s, 40s buildings that were well made, funky, cool spaces that were like easy to make even better. But we're talking about, are we really going to come in here and do drywall boxes with stucco and hardy? It's like great, that's not gonna pull it off.
Well, and then are we like, is there a way with some sort of zoning overlay or use code or whatever that you can almost freeze development or gentrification at that special point in time where it's like there's enough cute boutiques and you feel safe enough to walk down the street at night, but there's still some grit and graffiti and guys, welding shit on the corner. I mean, that's just like this.
Well, I think that's a size thing. I think that's I think that gets to a lot size. It gets to who owns it. If the lot and the buildings are small enough that individual people can own it, then it's going to hold that. Sure, at some point, Patagonia buys 4 of them and puts their store in there. But that's the only way, if it's just a big lot that they've subdivided to look like little lots, there's still going to be one big owner. There's no real vested interest in the neighborhood. I mean, what we really want to encourage is like, you want the mechanic to own the building, and stay there. And okay, maybe he's not fixing Volkswagens, he's fixing Teslas, but he's still there, or whatever.
Right. And his property value has gone way up, and
right, yeah, exactly. His taxes are through the roof.
Right.
And he's got the ability to build 5 stories mixed use on top of his garage.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So this map was kind of, it was the first I'd seen it since between the first and second meetings, and it addresses a little bit of the concern I had about the vertical zones of the design character spaces. Again, calling this the main street live work, while still keeping, I think this is the part that's most important to keep funky, because it's so mixed. I really like the idea of pulling over some of these business concepts along Goose Creek that take advantage of overlooking the creek and having that open space. And I think that's a good example for sure. And then these are, again, these nodes that they're proposing. This one would have to be more of a public-private partnership. But the image that they put on this gathering space slide was it's similar to the floodway, like Confluence Park, REI.
Yeah,
I can't remember if he said that is the space or it's similar to.
I don't think, no, I mean, there's water
Right. That's
in
right.
the
Of course, it's the
confluence,
confluence of
yeah.
Platte and Cherry Creek, so of course not. But I just, this image really resonated with me because of this Goose Creek opportunity. Seems like a no-brainer for creating kind of this this floodway, bike path, public-private partnership. But then I started looking at the flood map along this area.
Right.
And thought that maybe this area might turn into this. Again, there's no water, there's not really water here. It is a floodway. But maybe it could be an opportunity for something like this that I think could be pretty successful. And you have like Sanitas, this is probably the most outdoor, one of those vibrant spots in this area, just because of the brewery that's right there.
Sure.
yeah. In the top of
But I
the-
still think even in that picture in the lower right there, that, I mean, what are you doing there, right? I mean, you're riding your bike. I mean, you're really going to want to bring your kids there when you could go to a bunch of other places in town that are more,
Yeah,
Yeah, it
like,
seems like
I don't
there
know.
needs
I
to
mean,
be-
it
it would
seems
have
like,
to be programmed, maybe.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
got to be programmed. And I want to, it'd be great to see those art galleries right along that path.
Yeah, or like
You
four
know, like,
little
Why does it
chiclet-
need to be? I know everyone talks about open space, right? And we need outdoor, but there's different ways to think about that. It doesn't always have to be like a park, quote unquote. I mean,
Every park I've been to that I've actually sat down for extended period of time in the middle of an urban environment usually had a really dope pop-up bar. that
yeah,
you could
exactly.
get
Or a coffee
music
shop or
pumping
something.
and
Yeah, something. I mean, I remember all the discussions in the, the civic center downtown, and they had all these meetings. We were gonna, and in the end, they built exactly what the first plan was. And there's some okay stuff, but it was such a missed opportunity. I know it's all in the floodplain. I remember showing them a museum that Zaha Hadid did in Wolfsburg, Germany, that's in the middle of the river. And it was like, we could do this. Like, you can't park there. If the cars float away in the flood, so be it. Nobody's dying. Instead we got kind of this, which is like, oh, everyone's going to come here and sit there, but they don't, So I think, I think it's got to be programmed like in some interesting way.
It needs like a Rayback with.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Like art gallery Rayback, right there.
Or at least some food trucks.
Yeah. Food trucks.
You got the space, you just need the food trucks.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, it's cool. I mean, I think, it'll be super interesting to see how all this stuff evolves. I imagine there's going to be something that goes in that's a big draw. Who knows what it is. It might not even be what we could possibly imagine at this point. You never know.
Yeah. I mean, this right now there's conversation about how do we make this not so much an island. I mean, in my mind, this phase 2 is an island, so that's just an island within an island.
Is the north and south? So on here, like by the number 4 there, that's like a local road? But how do you drive from the north to the
No,
south?
that's the
That's it?
proposed bike path. Multi,
So how do you drive? You gotta drive all the way out to
foot.
Belmont
Belmont,
and down.
foothills.
So
I
there's
could
that
be wrong
one.
about that. I think so. It's hard to, I mean, can you
So
tell
how do you go north south? You can't in a car.
between the local roads? It could be a local road. That could be a local road.
Is that a local road?
I'm having a hard time on their,
Oh, I
Back
think it does say
out.
local road.
they all look like.
Oh, wait, no, is
main
it
line.
pedestrian path?
It's a weird offset from the Frontier intersection. That'd be strange to have an offset vehicular intersection like that.
I know that this, they're
Right.
talking about this as pedestrian. I don't remember this being vehicular.
I mean, it seems like you would need some way to drive north, south.
It seems like all the rage in Boulder these days is every single outdoor company that exists anywhere on the planet needs to have, even if it's their one and only retail brick
I
and
know.
mortar, is somehow in Boulder. And
Yeah.
then all this direct to consumer Instagram stores are somehow, if they have 5, retail locations globally, there's one in Boulder. And then every tech company who's made it needs to have some amount of office space in Boulder. It's outrage. It's wild how consistent that development pattern has been.
Yeah,
No, it is funny.
Can I check in on the time and see how
Yeah.
we're doing in terms
Yeah,
of?
I'm gonna have to leave in about 5 minutes. My daughter has a school function. I can't believe school stuff is starting already.
I know. We're getting close. So, again, this was the floodplain map. So you can see, this is the boundary of the
wow.
whole project. So, 500-year floodplain is, we've all built within that. It's not, as much of a design constraint, I think. But I do wonder about this
100-year.
area, that is in conveyance zone and just little splatterings of, high hazard. So, and that was right at that park, that floodway option. So that's why I thought that this would be an opportunity, just because it is a little harder to get buildings permitted in 100-year and the conveyance zone areas. So, what buildings can go there, and what are the constraints on them, and do they need to be kind of like the Harvest House up on a 10-foot plinth platform?
Maybe that's what we
out
do,
of the
though.
flood zone, and it's like,
The
oh,
whole neighborhood's a plinth and you just
Yeah.
have tons of parking underneath, infinite
Yeah.
parking, on a giant plinth.
so I think what the industrial that's in there now is raised a little bit, but it's like loading dock height, which is kind of perfect for the
Right.
the uses that are in there. Although now none of them are warehouses anymore, and except for the BC Interiors maybe, but
And Scarpa, no, those are all shipping centers. Scarpa and La Sportiva, those are both like national distribution centers.
yeah, and office, sort of mixed, yeah.
That's what we need. We need to bring back Sneagrab in this neighborhood's giant, ski, snowboard, telly center, swap market.
So in the last meeting, the takeaway was that I think this is the planning board. I don't know where the R came from, suggested that the priority for him and the rest of their board is to add as much access. Oh, no, sorry, Parks and Rec.
That's Parks, yeah.
Access to parks as possible, especially given this, that this is going to be largely a newly developed residential area, lots of families potentially. And if we can't provide park access within Boulder Junction, let's ensure that we're providing good access to nearby parks like East Mapleton, Howard, Houston, et cetera. Consider Goose Creek as an opportunity to bring additional pocket parks to the area. So I thought that was, we also have to look at this realistically, like maybe we're not going to get that that image of, you know, a park or this.
Right.
There, you know, we need to give equal opportunities to adjacent parks and so forth. And then so that was the floodplain thing.
It's gotta be so funny to hear everybody who's like so myopic because of their particular, you know, organization or affiliation, like spit just 100% like park centric or transportation centric or
Right. And then there's not a lot of, it's too early to talk about design. So I'm just like
Right.
throwing
Yeah.
things in wherever, because, I mean.
I
we
think
can talk
mass
about-
and scale is the
well, and you know where it
Design
all
issue.
goes, right? So as they start like taking big, you know, color diagrams sort of moves, you can at least comment on how that ends up becoming sticks and bricks. If you know, like
Right.
the opportunities and the casualties of efforts like this.
Right. How do we get it through planning? Although I think with form-based code, the idea is that it somewhat doesn't skip that step, but it makes that process easier and faster.
Mhm.
But I think you guys did bring up some like, you know, one good suggestion about the materiality and how that can dictate and preserve character, and how do we maintain, how do we differentiate this and keep it funky? And I think that can be done with a lot through scale and materiality,
Mhm.
and then and maybe less so with kind of the forced paseos and open spaces. I think those in this type of development that is so diverse, maybe that needs to happen a little more organically and needs to be planned a little bit less.
I'm thinking, you got me thinking about Portland, but I was just in Seattle 2 weeks ago, and we spent all of our time in Fremont,
Mhm.
which is kind of north of the lake and then west of the university campus. And that is like a total example of this right here, where
Did you see the Fremont Troll? My friend built that, Steve Badanes.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's under the overpass. There's a giant troll. It was like where people were shooting up heroin and stuff. So
Yeah.
he went in with students from UW and they built a giant troll, and he's like eating a Volkswagen bug.
yeah.
And now it's become like a place where people go. People have weddings there. I mean, it's crazy stuff. And this was a long time ago, but it transformed that whole Fremont neighborhood.
Well, and the Fremont has all the boutiques, but then they do have a few of these like larger kind of brewery distillery components because there was opportunity for that. But I think as you guys are talking about the paseos and the green space, back to some earlier comments about the lot size, I think that's spot on. Like there's a bunch, because of the topography there, they end up with a bunch of like angular roads and crossing the grid, which ends up with these like cute little Flatiron type sites
Mhm.
that pretty much 90% of them were like boutiques or ice cream shops or smoothie, you know, something that was like achievable if you're just gonna like give your business dream an opportunity, but you're
Mhm.
not funded by, you know, venture capitalism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How are those lots divided to not make funky, you know, build to lot line shapes?
Yep. You certainly got enough of that on 30th and Pearl.
Right.
It's tricky though. Like that new deli, Curtis Park Deli or whatever, it's really good, but there's no way to get there if you don't live above it. Like there's a
Right.
parking garage under it off of an alley. And if the idea is you're going to run and grab a quick cup of coffee and a breakfast sandwich on your way to work, that's a 30-minute effort to park,
Where is
walk a
this?
block.
Sorry.
It's in one of the buildings that just came online, that it's next to like Hot Works and all that. It's basically 30th and Pearl Parkway, and it's on the south and east side of that intersection. And it's just one of the like tenant spaces at the ground level where there's, you know, 5 vacancies along that run. But it's storefronts 30th where there's no parking. And it's a grab and go deli. So it's a very interesting, you know, I feel bad for them.
Yeah, Roy,
Mhm.
that's what I was saying about the 29th Street Mall, is that because there's no time limit on that parking. Were you here for that?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
it's so annoying. The
You
amount of times,
just
it's like,
can't like run into a store because, you know, somebody, Lululemon is parked in that.
yeah,
store.
well, it's like the coolest street. Like as I get to the intersection, I always want to drive down it. I'm like, there's definitely no fucking parking. there.
Right.
Yeah.
And you
Um,
can't access the garage from that side. So basically,
Yeah.
if you go down that road, which is the cutest little road in the development,
Right.
Yeah, you gotta loop
It-
around.
yeah, it's a one time, like you just, your fingers crossed, but there's no like, oh, you know what, I'm gonna bail out. And like, that would have been smart if they had a way to access underground from that side of the development.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of times where some of those places where you just need to run in quickly. Like I had a site visit on 11th and Pearl today, and I just needed to like run in quickly, and it just, your fingers crossed, if I didn't have parking, then I was just gonna have to come back tomorrow, you know, it's like, or
Yeah.
abandon the trip downtown or whatever, like, it's hard. I think that, like I said, parking is, I'm mixed on that. But
Yeah,
I think you guys brought up another good point, that I wrote down in here about the Rhino transit oriented development that's happening, and the huge numbers of, huge amount of parking required for that.
Yes.
And I can't remember if they built that into phase one, or I think they built some in, but I can't remember.
Well, it's odd because like I used to live down at where Table Mesa becomes South Boulder Road there, and that there's that big RTD transit station, like the park and ride is right there.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, it's actually pretty full often, and it's nice because it's like that's that direct express bus to the airport. They've got the direct stuff for, you know, sport events and Union Station and things, but they can support it because people are actually like, they can drive there and park and
Mhm.
leave it for a week. It's a reasonable, you know, it's like, I'm confused how we have a transit center that was then like, what do you do? Like, because there's no like art, it's not like that's the arterial and there's gonna be local L lines or whatever they're called. What do we call them here? Light rails.
Light rail,
They
yeah.
weren't going to have like a local distribution network associated eventually, right? So it's like you funnel all these people to the transit village. And if it really is going to become this awesome way to reduce Highway 36 or US 36 traffic and 93 traffic and like really connect a lot of Boulder to these destinations, people are going to have to drive there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why they do think, you know, I'm joking about the driverless cars, but that is the goal, you know, the step, how do you get, you know, from the transit hub to your door, your
Yeah.
office or whatever. And, you know, that's the hope, that they'll have like taxis come back, but they'll be more efficient, and, you know, you'll have 10 people in one taxi,
Sure.
but
Well, I know it's 6, so I
yeah, I gotta run.
run, but I just wanted to give you quick next steps. Like I said, there's a planning board hearing August 22nd, so we'll give our feedback to the joint board, and hopefully we can get some of that into the planning board packet. And then the city council hearing for plan adoption is September 21st. Right.
So Kalani has her hand up again.
Oh, yeah, Kalani, maybe, yeah, you can speak more articulately to that.
You're
You're
muted.
muted.
You articulated that fine. I just wanted to make sure that we spent a little time summarizing these
Oh.
recommendations for the minutes. So if we could do that, if now is the appropriate time, if the kind of open discussion is over.
Yeah, I think it's great.
Okay.
So,
Brandon, I just have one more, just a comment about the lot, just thinking about the lot size. You know, we talked about that, like how could you incentivize property owners to subdivide? You know, it could be that the process to do that is completely truncated. So like by right, they could do it, come in with a plat, it's approved, done. Maybe there's some financial incentive, but you know, there's got to be some incentive, because people aren't gonna do it just, you know, on their own.
Yeah.
Well,
so-
or that you just can't redevelop your property unless it's, here's the maximum lot size. We're so used to seeing minimum lot sizes in the zoning code, but
Yeah, that's true. He could do something like that. All right, thanks,
And-
guys. This is
Thank you.
awesome.
later,
I'm
Steve.
getting-
Thanks, Stephen.
Bye.
And I would suggest too on the recommendations, as you guys are summarizing these, is maybe you don't have to focus so much on the exact solution, like a plat versus the division, but capturing that you want to see smaller development areas, lot size, or things like that. I think that 'cause there's a whole implementation stage to this process that gets into whether it's form-based code or development code revisions that will really help take those big ideas and get it into the regulation.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I think we had just in summary, we had a good conversation about the commercial nodes and strategies for keeping sort of the character of these commercial nodes that are already in there, with some focus on connection to these transportation nodes, which are on the other side of the train tracks. And some of the feedback that I got on, there needs to potentially be some type of a draw in order to keep these commercial nodes successful, a cultural piece like a children's museum or something of a theater, something of that nature. But also in order to if we're jumping around to the paseos and to the design character, I think the design character is also going to inform this, the success of these commercial nodes too, with scale and massing, density, like a need for higher density lots that are smaller lots, but are in shapes that can be accommodate a not a super irregular building type, and in the hopes that we can do zero lot line type buildings, and that maybe the landscape design, the corridors and the paseos needs to be a little more organic around the development and the use types and the industry and building types that are going to be, and the lot division that are going to be implemented, and also bringing in some of the character from the east side of Foothills Parkway, and then talking about the success of the nodes and the parks areas. Some suggestions were that the parks need to be programmed in order for them to be more used and access. Some programming would be like an art gallery walk zone or pop-up bar, or like a Rayback art gallery food truck combo. But some potential spaces for that could be along Goose Creek, as well as that maybe south area by Sanitas. And then talking about how, different strategies for keeping this area industrial and funky. We had a lot of discussion about not having this turn into Pearl Street or 29th Street, and we don't need another big retailer in here. It needs to be more, it just needs to be different. And we compared, did a lot of comparison to Portland, Rhino, east of
Fremont, Washington.
Fremont, Washington.
Yeah, Fremont, Seattle.
Oh, yeah. And then I like the comment about how to create like a freeze at the mid gentrification, and
Yeah.
cross the threshold of going from funky but new and invigorated, but also not just unaccessible and expensive and
Characterless.
characterless. Yes. So I think,
Arrested development, that's what they call that, right?
and Kalani, I can type up a little summary too, so if that's helpful, like Todd does, and I'll send my summary, or Todd, are you-
I believe that Amanda is actually typing as you're reading this out
okay,
for the summary.
awesome.
Let me ask you, did any of the discussion grow legs in your minds? The part about like we haven't really given phase one a fair shake to actually demonstrate if it's capable of supporting the activity that was intended. And then it does feel like there's a big moment happening here with a lot of new housing coming online in the next 6 months. A lot of offices requiring, in-person employment, and that, there could, I guess I would hate to kind of, it would be a bummer to see phase two reacting to phase one before it's had a chance to actually blossom.
Yeah, and I think that some of their working groups do involve realtors and investment people. So they are looking at lessons learned, or also just the successes of phase one through so many different avenues and perspectives that if you hear about that retail, like the prices of the retail are not, they're still in line and in keeping with some of the downtown rents and spaces, same with the housing. So, I mean, I think that they're anticipating these spaces to be filled and this to become a little more vibrant, naturally, even I think without the transportation node. But I know that has been a big question of mine. I'm like, well, let's just build phase two based on lessons learned on phase one. Like, but I think that these are different in the sense that phase one is more urban and high density, and a lot of housing and maybe higher end housing and higher end retail. And then phase two is going to be a little more accessible housing, family oriented and industry, and I think it's different. It's just different from phase one. That we can gain a lot of insight from phase one, of course, and giving it more time, I think, to shake out. But at the same time, this is its own animal. I mean,
Sure,
and it's physically severed by train tracks.
Yeah.
So, but I agree. I think I think I do speak harshly on phase one. So I appreciate, Rory, your positive perspective.
Well, I just don't know yet.
And
I feel like,
optimism.
again, I just remember driving through there in the heart of the pandemic being like, oh, that is a bummer. Like this thing just opened.
Yeah. Yep. And who knew the pandemic would happen?
Yeah.
So, well, I think that was really helpful, and I'm excited we had such a good conversation discussion on that. And Mel, I don't know if you had any, are we veering too far from the planners direction? You're on mute.
You're muted.
Oh. Lower left. That looks good, no?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I couldn't find the mute button. It was underneath your screen. I have one piece of information for you all, you referenced the east side of Foothills. That was recently conceptualized as the East Boulder Sub-Community Plan. So there's a formalized adopted plan for that, and that's where the use types came from. The use types that you see showing up here were originally developed at the East Boulder Sub-Community Plan. So there is a plan if you want to look and see what's intended. That neighborhood that you were talking about, that's right across, it's pretty cool. And
Yeah.
that's the one that I rose a concern about it becoming gentrified through the process. And so the city did engage in a planning process for trying to establish social equity on what exists. So they've got, Kathleen Kennedy has been working on that. They've got a plan outline that was prototyped out at that site, which I think could be very applicable if there are areas in this TVAP2 that would benefit from. Let's document better with a finer tooth comb what's here before we superimpose something. So that's just FYI. You may not have been familiar with that. I think the input that I think would be really useful from the board at some point is on the use types. Are they appropriate? Do you think that they might, be the right ones to propose? It sounds like we've gotten the slides you showed from staff at the last planning board, input from the project, and it sounds like we'll be seeing they're going to be looking for approval of a plan in the next week or so. So use types, are they the right ones? I'm not sure. And I love, and I've been pressing it. I hope that you guys keep pressing. What are the lessons learned, from the form-based code? Because right now it's like, well, we're going to put a form-based code on this as well. But I'm not sure that we know the implications of it to the degree that we should before we go and apply a form-based code onto this section as well. So I encourage you to keep pressing. Let's see what the lessons are, and let's try to get kind of ahead of jumping into reuse of the form-based code before we really know what its potential or liabilities are. So I really, really appreciate your concern about those. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
The
thank
last
you.
thing, I have one last thing, and it's I and my backup will not be able to attend the September meeting. I put it out to the whole planning board and nobody stepped up. So you might not get a planning board liaison at your next meeting, but I'm going to keep trying. I'll ask again. Just FYI, heads up.
I'm out for the September meeting as well, guys. I'm going to be traveling.
Thank you for letting us know, both of you.
Yeah, and Rory, I think what ML was saying about the form-based code, you did projects in phase 1, right? Using the form-based code?
Yeah, we did one site there,
I feel like
the
you could
affordable housing site.
speak to the that experience as an architect better than I could, but that might be good feedback to bring.
Well, when they came down, were you on the call when we were providing feedback to the form-based code revisions that they wanted to pass this way?
Yeah.
And it was like, whoa, like you cannot code buildings. Like you cannot say this is going to be this height within this thing with this color. Like fast forward 1,000 years, we're going to look like we live in a computer chip where there's just regulating lines going all over the place. Like that's insanity. But I think they heard us loud and clear, because I'm pretty sure that kind of in that capacity died on the vine.
For adopting it for the whole like citywide type.
Yeah, well, those were all like the amendment proposals to the form-based code, where they were trying to like get so prescriptive in what you needed to do. It was like, cool, well, I guess we don't need architects anymore because we'll just follow the form-based code.
Right. But then if everybody's following the rules and is following the prescription, then they don't have to spend as much time in front of planning board. And I think that was sort of the hope. But I agree.
Sure.
I mean, I think we're looking at a site that needs to, I mean, ML, I really do want to take a look more at that east neighborhood development. Is that where?
East Boulder Sub-Community Plan.
East Boulder Sub-Community Plan. I think this Boulder Junction 2 is a overlay of Boulder Junction 1 and this sub-community plan.
Totally.
So I think that, you know, while we look at lessons learned, I think we just need to look at both. I think that's huge. That's huge insight. And in terms of form-based code, I can't imagine they're going to have form-based code in this east sub-community, or maybe. But, you know, Kalani, you're shaking your head like, yes, they might.
Yeah, so they are slated to do form-based code in activity center areas within East Boulder. There is a consultant coming on board to review what would be some changes or specifications that might be regionally specific. And so I think that the conversation around form-based code and some of those regulations, appropriateness, that's definitely another design conversation that will likely be coming through DAB at that point. But because it's where this conversation was very kind of topical about the area plan, more global planning, the form-based code discussion is very specific. And so you're going to have to spend, I think that conversation is going to be one of bringing everybody up to speed of what it is now, the code requirements, what we've seen, and then having to, so you got to kind of bring everyone up to speed. They're familiar with it. So multiple conversations where you can then start to discuss what those design proposals are, some of those types of things. So it's another process, I believe, at that period of time that we've already heard, like, they may do another working group. I don't know. This pilot may be, you know, the thing that goes to that project too. So we just have to kind of wait and see how that may shake out. But yes, for East Boulder and those activity areas, and for Boulder Junction 2, the area also for that area. So
yeah, so I wonder if we can
added.
get insight or input now as to, you know, if they're going to use a template, you know, which template maybe fits the character of the direction of architecture that they're trying to achieve in Boulder Junction 2. Is, you know, maybe it's not Boulder Junction 1, maybe it's
something else.
something else.
Different.
Yeah, maybe the
Yeah.
templates, yes, you know,
Could be different. Materials could be different. Scale could be different.
yeah,
You know, there's all kinds of, each form-based code area does have a regulating plan that's very specific to that area. It includes all the connections in there. And so there is kind of a level of specificity that's regionally specific. And then there's the building design section. So I imagine that you guys will be seeing that. And I know planning board will definitely be seeing that come through again. So that is what is on the slate right now, but we did realize that that's kind of it's a larger conversation than one night, I think, for form-based code for.
and Christopher made that pretty clear too, that
Yeah.
that he will be asking for our insight, but that's down the road and a bigger.
Yeah, I think it has to be structured right to be productive, right? Because you could be going over things and you want to cover some ground on that one.
Yeah.
So can I
Are
ask,
we-
sorry, for Brendan, because we had some beginning of a summary and then a bit of a little conversation kind of tacked into the summary. For Amanda and on my sake, if you don't mind sending us a copy of what your notes from this,
Yeah.
I think that would be helpful. Is that correct, Amanda? Because then we can then have that forwarded over to our planning staff. Because as you noted in the calendar, this project's moving pretty swiftly to planning board in city council,
Yeah.
so.
I'll pull them together right now. I mean, they're just kind of bullet points, but, and I'll put them in our list of topics to discuss.
That would be great. Yeah,
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
thank you.
Good. Thanks. So, we didn't ask if there's any public participation around this matter, but it doesn't look like there's anybody else out
There's no
there.
one. There's
Okay.
no one on the call.
All right, so we'll conclude that. Board matters on Boulder Junction 2 and move on to, I don't think we have any other board matters. Is it?
Kalani, can I bring up my,
Yeah.
okay,
You're
so,
right.
there's been just a lot of heat and conversation around this Harvest House student housing review that we did and the planning board. I missed the review last night, but hopefully you guys are closer to resolution. And I was sent an email with a packet before the planning board. Well, and I'm sure it's all on the planning board website now, but where they showing the changes and improvements that they had made to the building. And I really wanted to bring the DAB back into it, just because it's like, you know, I was geeking out over it a little bit and also happy that they made some changes. But we cannot, you know, I didn't want it to be a re-review. I just want it to be like this is where they started and this is where they are. So Kalani suggested, and legally we cannot do that. So Kalani suggested that maybe we do you know, we can use this like kind of like a lessons learned and also a you know, project history and where it was and where it turned out and how our conversation influenced how
I
our
love
comments
that.
maybe influenced like where the project turned out. And
We used to use the retreats for stuff like that.
We
yeah,
did the one for canyons too, the canyon hotels, kind of before and
Yeah.
after.
yeah, so I think that I would like to propose a meeting, and I think it would be like 2 meetings from now, once it's out of
Public. Yeah, I think it would have to be a meeting where we don't have another project review. So possibly November, because I got word that you might have September and October project reviews. 2 months of those.
Bummer.
Um,
I'm
but
missing
it should
another
give
one.
you plenty of time to prep because it's gonna be, Brendan is leading this.
yeah,
Are we doing retreats anymore, even like virtually, or no? Is that just not a thing?
We haven't, but we can talk about that also once we go through this portion. So Brendan, as far as doing like a review of a past project, and now that I think once it gets through the call-up period at council too, I believe that the Millennium Harvest House still has to do that. But I think when we were talking, you were saying this, seeing if you can find another staff member that would be interested in doing this comparison between what you guys saw, what went to planning board on the first round after DAB review, and then a second round of kind of how it evolved over time.
yeah, I mean, I just it felt like you know, as a representative of the board, I was shouldering a lot of this
Yeah.
heavy conversation and a lot of heavy weight, and I just was hoping to make it more of a board discussion rather than just you know, like there was a public comment in the beginning of our last meeting and my words got a little bit misconstrued and twisted, and I was just like, you know, I don't want the board to think that that's actually what I said in the planning board meeting. So it's just a very interesting project, and I think it would be really cool to if planning staff wanted to be a part of that. Is that what you're saying, or is just, do you want me to lead that?
No, it would need to be a board-led kind of review. So if there's anybody else from DAB that wants to help you kind of review the project and either put together the presentation or kind of go through and look at the evolution of the design, this, I mean, we only have 3 members tonight, so maybe tonight's not the best night to see who wants to dig into something like this. Maybe
Yeah.
next month is a good time, but Rory, you're here tonight, so we could get an answer from
Yeah.
you.
I mean, I
Um,
would love to see this debrief, I guess. To me, it's very comparable to what we did for the Canyon
Yeah.
project. But that was staff led.
We're
And that's-
right now not staffed to do this.
Yeah.
We don't,
Yep.
we just don't have the manpower right now to do another project evaluation. Maybe after the new year, but if it's something that the board wants to lead in the design, we can definitely try to get you the resources on that end and provide you things like, links to maps or packets, and you can do the evaluation.
Let me ask a question, and then I got a boogie here at 6:30. I saw that ML mentioned that there was that they had a motion to approve. I guess, is there? Wait, does that mean it's done with planning board? Is that just the particular component of it? Or I guess when in the lifespan of this proposal is the appropriate time to actually reflect on it? Like
After
is it at a point where it's appropriate?
after all of any hearings that may be associated with it. So if it's subject to call up after this is finished and it doesn't, if it's not called up by council, that's an appropriate time to do kind of a design retrospective on what the moves were. But right now, mid review, when it's actually in the hands of another board or city council, is not the time for DAB to look at and do a review of the project.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. This will be fascinating though, because just having, watched over the last 5 years, us go from not having a whole lot to talk about, not a lot of projects, and then trying to encourage more projects, and then really starting to encourage planning board and like, how can we actually, because we felt so severed for a long time, where like our meeting minutes just went into the ether and we didn't even know if planning board looked at them. And now we've got, the liaisons are much more active, and there's kind of a lot more, God, I hate to use the word, but synergy between the boards. And it's almost like everything that the board that I first started on was trying to prod as far as process and engagement from DAB and like effect, like the effect that DAB or affect DAB can have. This does seem like a really good example project. I just would love to see it after it gets finished, spit out of the process, just to make sure that we're actually reflecting on it in its kind of end form.
Well, maybe we can talk about next week who wants to help me pull this together, because it'd be nice, if like you or Matthew or Todd or somebody that was at that Canyon review and sort of saw how that was formatted and put together, then.
Yep, I'd be happy
because,
to assist.
I mean, Shears Adkins really did a pretty good graphic presentation of before and after, and so their materials are, that's what I was just gonna talk about.
I mean, that's probably enough, honestly, and then maybe we just
Yeah.
wait until they actually clear their last gauntlet or whatever. But I think because what was trickier about Canyon is that they just pulled so many quick ones on the city, where they like submitted like, here's our facade materials and the color, and then it was like, what got built did not look like that. So that was a little bit trickier to piece together, because nobody wanted to communicate that professionally, because nobody was trying to document that they were doing that. So it was a complete kind of detective retro effort versus it sounds like Shears Atkins is like encouraging everybody to see what they've done and look how far we've come or whatever, look at the feedback we received and what we've done. That'll make it easy.
Well,
And
basically, it was
Canyon's
like-
had 10 years of development site review approvals that either expired and were redone and expired. And so I'm happy to share that with you, because there is, kind of a photo simulation overlay, but yours does not have to be that detailed, because we did that in response to, there was quite a bit of community questions on why does it look the way it does? Does it match the photo? And, so there was some investigative work that needed to be done too. And so that took a little bit of effort, but I don't think you need to have something that
The
detailed.
board at that time, like all of the members were like, all right, Kailani, show us how the hell that building got built. Like, how did that happen?
Well, and I think, Roy, the difference on this one is that
Yeah.
it was kept going to planning board, and planning board was like, we are not going to give you your parking reduction, and I think they're asking for height. Unless you make some changes on the massing and design of this building, and they kept coming back with the same stuff. And it wasn't until the planning board was like, well, we could reject this. And then they came back with the good changes. So I think that that's part of the conversation too of, planning board really put, like, the benefit of them really pushing for good design and how that turned out.
And us being
prevent
able
it.
to, this is a kind of a good recap with ML's earlier comments, like us being able to have a good support role for them, right? To make sure that when they recommend stuff to us and we do spend the time and energy to review it, that then it actually, they can be the teeth of DAB, because we don't have any teeth.
Right, and they were, I appreciated that for sure. So,
Cool. I'm excited to see it.
yeah,
All right, guys, I'll see you guys in
Okay.
October.
okay,
Okay, take care.
See ya.
Thanks, Roy.
Thank you, Brendan, for doing the presentation on the Boulder Junction. It
oh,
was really
yeah,
informative.
it's not my biggest strength, these presentations, but
It's okay, it was
it's
great.
exciting. I think I'm super interested in all of it, so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good.
thank you.
So we just lost a quorum, so I think we have to adjourn, right?
Yeah, we do. Have a good night, guys. Take care.
Bye.
Okay, bye.